am well, I'm Mustafa Abubaker. This is my new book. We Are Also Home. This is my third book, and this book comes at an important time for me. And I was actually working on it in my master's program. I just got my MA, and yeah, I was working on it while in graduate school, working as a graduate research assistant, and also while I was deciding between poetry and fiction as a creative writing outlet of my choice. And yeah, the book has been out for about a month now, and it's doing well. We have some good leads. Um, Books available on Amazon, on Kindle for now, as well as paperback. And I have physical copies with me. This is the front cover. Luis Pineda designed the front and back cover as well as the spine. So Luis, if you're watching this, shout out to you. Um, it really was a joint effort. And as you can see, the cover is very green, as is the back. And it's about 444 pages. So it's pretty long. So
Yeah, so I finished reading and I really, really enjoyed it because what you do is that you have these two places in communication with each other, right? So you have Karachi and then you also have Atlanta, Georgia. So what exactly gave you the idea for this novel? And how did you go about choosing where to set it?
I think the idea came in this novel like years ago. You know, I saw that a lot of the professions that westernized Pakistanis tend to fall into are stereotypical. And it's often because I noticed that just at a very young age that going to these davats and going to these brown parties that, you know, everyone sort of seemed to fit a mold. And if you didn't fit that mold, you were going to be slightly ostracized or left out. There wasn't much inclusion in that regard. And that's what inspired most of this. When I was thinking about what is this novel actually about, that's what really occurred to me. And secondly, what stood out to me was the fact that there was so much. There was just so much. I would say, man, there was so much determination within myself to write something that was a story about marginalized voices and was a story about and so much that did inspire me about this novel was that the roles that we were expected to fill into in order to feed families was so stereotypical. And I noticed that at a very young age, and that's what really stuck with me when I was thinking about what would inspire me to put this thing together. And I think that early childhood memory of just being observant of all these aunties and uncles excelling in their fields but still being overlooked for opportunities. Um,
And tell me about your two main characters, Yara and Temur. They kind of
yeah.
come from opposite ends of the spectrum, right? So what inspired you to have these, like, two people who come from very different places fall in love with each other?
Well, I think it's the romantic aspect of attraction amongst opposites. I've always been interested in juxtaposition, and I've always been interested in that sharp contrast, that stark contrast, and what that can mean for many people. Um, Chances are that the person who you're most compatible with will not be much like you. In fact, they may be completely opposite, because that balance is needed for two people to have a healthy relationship. And if that's not there, then I feel like enablement becomes a large point in the relationship, and it just becomes, to use that buzzword, toxic amongst two people. If they're too alike, it can just lead to some bad choice making and some bad decision making. So I think that experience in itself led me to create, some of these characters, including Yara and Timur, who are very different, very bold, very, very empowered. Yara being very privileged, Timur sort of, having to work for everything that he has. They are very, very different from each other. Um, I think what drew me to Timur was seeing seeing um seeing other people in my life who sort of resembled that, as far as his character and his name. um Seeing bits and pieces of her and other people throughout my life so far, and sort of bringing them to life,
Right.
onto that page. Yeah.
Definitely. And kind of going back to what you were saying, how the typical novel in English, the typical Pakistani novel in English is usually kind of weighed down by that elitism. And what I noticed in your novel is that other than showing these two people from, opposite ends of, like, Karachi, but also opposite ends of, like, their class backgrounds falling in love
Right.
with each other, you kind of show that clash of, cultures. But something else that you do is it's also the language you use in the dialogue. So what made you use kind of, like, street slang and American English when you in the dialogue that you were writing?
I mean, I grew up here. I was born in Queens, New York, and a lot of the dialogue just came from, I think, my own voice, other rather than their voices. Um, I think that at the end of the day, while dialogue can be region specific, while it can be limited to where you're from and where you're raised and where you spend most of your time, what what sticks out is the the sort of globalization of that common American dialogue amongst people from all over. Um, and that's due to the internet. That's due to having access to Twitter. That's due to having access to Instagram. Um, and now we have Hive and other social media platforms that further accentuate that growth. Um, so so when it came to using that dialogue in here, I just think that was my way of reaching the most people and illustrating to the readers that both of the characters or every character who's using that dialogue or that sort of vernacular and rhetoric in this book is influenced by America, whether they believe it or not, whether they know it or not, because for all its faults, America is influential that cultural standpoint, and without its slang, I felt I wasn't going to reach that many people, and it was almost my way of code switching and reaching those people using their language and what they're familiar with.
For sure. And I definitely did get that sense of code switch in your novel, because you were going from Steel Town to Defense to Atlanta, and with the change in scene, the language shifted as well, but it was the same kind of style that you were writing in. And something that I really liked about the book was how, in using that kind of language too, there was authenticity in it. So how do you think your novel distinguishes itself from, like, I guess you could say, the more Mohsin Hamid or Kamala Shamsi type of literature that's out there?
I think it just comes from. I think what differentiates it is a younger perspective, um, and and differentiating it from Mohsin Hamid or Shamsi is the fact that they they spent a lot of time. I feel at least Mohsin Hamid spent some time back and forth between between Pakistan, London, and New York City, um, and also Mohsin Hamid went to prestigious universities. Um, I feel like he went to Princeton, studied under Joyce Carol Oates, and here I am. I went to a local state university, public university in Georgia called Kennesaw State University, and it's not Princeton, but I still learned a lot from my professors there. And maybe going to a school like that definitely influenced me in some regard. Um, I wasn't surrounded by people who go to Princeton University, um, and maybe that differentiated me from that. I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And why did you choose Atlanta as the place where Yara and Timur end up after Yara gets her record deal?
Well, Atlanta is such a thriving city for music. It's my home. It's where I've spent most of my life, um, and I almost wanted to insert my own surroundings in the novel because I wanted to play to that adage of write what you know, and use that as a strong landing point for the book, and for the narrative. Well, semi-standing point, or landing point, because what stuck out to me was the fact that you know out of all the cities in the United States, it is more of a music city than other cities. Other cities may be more known for sports or politics, but here there's so much history in that art form that it only felt right for one, the author to be from there, and two, for the two characters in the book to pursue that art form and then come to the mecca of where that art was made and produced.
Definitely. And do you think that Atlanta is also, it's a very much a Black city as well? And it's also where a lot of cutting edge talent is coming up. So what do you think was Yara's relationship with that, both Yara and Timur, as brown people who are coming into this very African American city?
a majority black population in Atlanta. Right now it's Black History Month, and what I feel what I feel about how they perceived here coming from there is is a sort of is a sort of, I would say, discomfort initially, um, because it's hard for anyone to acclimate to any sort of American culture, um, especially coming from such a place where there aren't where that culture isn't as physical or as human. Um, it's only on the internet, and I would imagine when someone from there would come here, they would maybe take some time to assimilate into it, and it wouldn't be an immediate comfort. Um, but I think music was that common signifying factor for both of them, because it is such a universal language, and it can transcend race, skin color, gender, orientation, preference, anything that divides people. Music is that one thing that can break down any barrier. So I think that's, if it wasn't for that saving grace, and if that wasn't in this book, I'm not sure how they would have acclimated, at least initially. It might have taken some time. They may have gone the other way and only socialized with other Pakistani people just because that was easier and that would suit them better.
So you dedicated the book to brown women, particularly South Asian brown women across the world. And the dedication is kind of pertinent to the material in the book itself and the plot and the characters, because I would say, like, one of the driving forces of the book, the person who kind of triggers the plot and Yara and Taimur meeting, is Taimur's mom, Farishte. So what made you zero in on kind of, and you talk about this a little bit in your dedication as well, but kind of like the hyper visibility, but also the sexism and misogyny and oppression that brown women face? Why did you decide to make your book about that? Because I mean, when I was reading it, I got the perception that this was really like the heart of the book, like how Taimur, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but how Taimur kind of journeys, throughout the entire storyline, and he eventually does find, or he eventually does come to terms with everything that's happened, but it always comes back to his mom.
Yeah, well, I think I think I think Pakistani men, Indian men, any man growing up in South Asia has a special relationship with their parents first and foremost. Our parents do mean a lot to us, generally, and as we grow older, we don't realize that they're also growing older, um, and when it comes to mothers, well, in Islam, there's a saying that says that heaven is under your mother's feet, um, and there's emphasis on the person who brings you into this world, because it's like an unexplainable bond, that's there, um, and at the end of the day, they may be your only true fan. But me personally, my mother raised about 2 kids, um, sacrificed a lot, still managed to cook dinner every night for 2 kids and a husband. Um, she learned how to swim when she was 45 years old. Never knew how to swim before. It's not easy to learn how to swim when you're that old. Um, she she had gone to medical school, but she had not pursued residency or anything after it because she was busy raising us. And it was only when we were old enough that she decided to try and do residency. And I remember her giving interviews after interviews, people constantly rejecting her, people constantly saying, no, sorry, you're not the right fit. She must have given well over 500 interviews to different programs. She finally got one in Alabama. So she would drive to Alabama, I think every day, something crazy like that. And she would end up driving all the way to Birmingham from Atlanta. Not even from Atlanta, from like at this time. We moved to the city in 2008. So right before we moved to the actual city, she was driving from like the suburbs all the way to Alabama to do her rotations and her residencies. So just seeing how overlooked she was because one, she didn't go to medical school in the United States. She went to Sindh Medical College in Karachi, and she definitely had an influence on me about perseverance. And not only that, I've seen so many of you know so many of my peers struggle with that acceptance and that assimilation, at different places, like the masjid or at at school, at work, people shortening their names, um, people being obsessed with how fair or how dark they are. Um, I mean, people are enough at the end of the day for for someone, and honestly for everyone, as they should be. And yeah, it just weighed heavy on my spirit to see that and to see them go through that because the amount of respect and admiration I have for for women, especially brown women, is through the roof. They do everything for us. They are unsung heroes, and they do demand a certain level of respect, um, gratitude, dignity, all these things, and also the rights that women struggle to obtain and maintain in places like India and Pakistan. That also weighs heavy on me. Whenever I see a terrible story in the news that has to do with that, I just get the worst feeling. So that, I mean, all that stuff tends to tends to take a toll on my mental mind, and think to myself, if I did have a sister, um, how would I, you know, what would I do to be a good brother, or how would I have been a brother, if I can't be one, um, to people who aren't necessarily related to me, but who are in fact, my sisters, at least in Islam, at the end of the day.
For sure. And Yara and Farishte, both in the novel, they have something in common. So how exactly did you get the idea for that?
Yeah, I think that I wanted there to be I wanted there to be a bond between Yara and Farishte that dealt largely with science fiction, or fantasy. Um, the idea really came to me when I was thinking about books I had read in the past, um, like Ralph Waldo Emerson's book, um, something that something that the only two of them could share that was not really applicable to anyone else. The idea was for it to sort of trickle down from Farishte to Yara, and then and then that cycle ends, um, or that commonality ends, at the end of the book. Um, so yeah, I think that's where I got the idea from. Just the fact that I wanted them to have something that wasn't exactly plausible, but still makes for a good story and a good
And
metaphor.
yeah, so what exactly is it supposed to be a metaphor for?
It's supposed to be a metaphor for it's supposed to be a metaphor for the the lack of almost the lack of visibility that that a lot of people face in large group settings, or in professional spaces, um, in social settings, where you can almost be overshadowed or overlooked, simply because you're a woman, simply because you're brown, and simply because you're both. Um, I think it's a metaphor for not being seen, and wanting to maintain that visibility. So, what better way to make that metaphor come across than make it very very literal, in the book, and almost treat it that way. Um, I think that um, that device in the book sort of brings to mind a lot of things, like the cloak in, the Harry Potter books, but almost taking it to another level.
Yeah. And do you feel Timur eventually is able to see both Yara and his mother by the end of the novel?
I, I think I think I think he so that's a yeah, I think he is, and it's only because he has to realize certain things. It's up to the reader to realize, actually, if, disregarding the metaphor, if it's only Timur who cannot see her at times, until he himself comes to a realization, or an awakening. I think towards the end he can, especially since he's gone through so much with her. He has to. I don't think he has a choice anymore. Um, he's no protagonist, but he definitely has a turn of character at the end of the book.
as much as this novel is about brown women, it's also a lot about brown men and their relationship with brown women. So how did you go about like being, very honest about the violence, the toxicity, the complicated feelings that brown men harbor throughout their lives, but then also kind of unpack that throughout the book? How did you go about doing that?
Well, I wanted to read a lot. Um, I wanted to read everything I could on websites like, um, obviously JSTOR, um, um, Google Scholar, and anything in academia that would sort of shed light on a sort of psychotherapeutic, like a psychology based um, text on these people, trying to understand, one, where do their biases come from, um, where do their notions of masculinity come from, why are they like this, to quote a lot of Twitter users. um, so I think that sort of turned to academia in order to search and find these answers and shed light on these people, aided the fact that, thinking back to my younger days, and seeing, um, thinking back on how a lot of guys my age, guys whose parents are also from Karachi, um, how they were like, what they would say, even people who were older than me, who got into the wrong crowds, or pretended to be something they weren't. Um, that that also like resonated with me. A lot of soul searching and memory digging, it came along with the academic research, and sort of wanting to get it right, but also wanting to put the flaws out there, if they're out there.
And when you were doing this soul searching, like how did you deal with all the different memories coming up? How did you make sense of them?
Well, I wanted to frame them like chronologically. I mean, my earliest memory of you know of a brown guy, having a having a girlfriend, if that's what you can call it, was like as early as like 2000, I think 6, um, I think, or might have been that, yeah, 2006, and like, um, the way they interacted was so like, I mean, it was the classic, it was the classic, well, not classic, but there was a lot of put downs in that dynamic. There was a lot of sort of, disrespect in that dynamic, that at the time we shrugged it off and thought it was funny, but that imbalance of that imbalance of a white woman doing so much that she can, um, and putting 80% effort into the relationship, while the brown man is putting like 20% or maybe 10% relationship into that effort into that same relationship. Even though these are just teenagers at the end of the day, barely, it's still like struck a chord with me. Like, dang, like that's how that seems to be working for them. No matter how lopsided the effort is. Um, so thinking chronologically, and like thinking, okay, there was that, then there was the other one with, you know There was another one. I think a year after that. The dynamics between all these folks in that order, and how they progressed over time, and what it all amounted to at the end of the day, um, almost like an equation, or like looking for a pattern, or looking for some sort of common thread amongst all of them, which I honestly couldn't find many. They all seem sort of all over the place. Um, and then most recently, um, realizing that a lot of the marriages that go on in the country could very well be arranged and be between two people who had known each other since they were in middle school, because they grew up in the same hometown. And after all of this college and professional life and meeting all these people and living out of state, um, their marriage is with someone they knew when they were only 12 or 13, and were only friends at that time. So there's there's so much to unpack there, that kind of started from there and then ended up there.
When it came to the psychological research you were doing, what exactly did you find?
Well, I found a lot of research about, and this word, which I think, and in our defense, I want to say a lot of men do kind of suffer from this, especially maybe like some who grow up with their father too. Um, I found a lot of and I may butcher this word because I've never been too good at pronunciation, but infantilization amongst brown men who are like being clapped for and cheered for when they do the most basic things. Um, that's not okay. Um, that only reinforces like a coddling or a lack of responsibility that you know um, that a black man wouldn't be cheered for, a white man wouldn't be cheered for, maybe even a Far East Asian person man wouldn't be cheered for. Um, there's so much doting, and there's so much love for a son in a brown family, or for a young man, or for any male, like that 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 ratio is just so imbalanced. Imagine if all that love for that son went to that daughter instead. um, Things would be so different. So I found that to be like super troubling, because there were like academic papers about this stuff, and it blew my mind. Because I was like, "Yo, like this can't be right." And it occurred to me like in my mind, like, "Oh, maybe that is the case." But then seeing it evidenced, um, by studies and trials and all these things really really affected that. That's one of the main things I found, um, when I was looking into this stuff. And the other thing I found was going back to the visibility. Um, I think it was a crazy stat. I can't remember the exact stat right now, but it was a pretty bad number out of another pretty bad number, when it came to out of this many women felt unseen or unheard. And I think this was prior to Corona. I think the funny thing is with Corona, that visibility is really increasing. Um, because one, in Zoom meetings, um, you almost have no choice but to give your attention, to everyone speaking, um, because they're right there on the screen. And and it's also put women in a position of power, when they are communicating this way, if they want to turn their camera off or on, or you know, whatever they want to do. The ball is entirely in their court. So a lot of these statistics came up, and a lot of that stuff really affected the writing of this.
Right. And something that I've noticed, you know, just as a woman and as someone who used to be doing activism full time, and then obviously as a writer and journalist, is that and you kind of alluded to this as well earlier, but a lot of men of color, they take out the anger and frustration that they have with society on the woman that they're in relationships with. And we definitely, in the beginning of the novel, we definitely see that aggression in Temur. So how did you go about handling that, especially where Yara was concerned and where Temur and Yara's relationship was concerned?
Yeah, I mean, he was an angry young man. Definitely in the beginning of the book, just angry at, you know, the cards life had dealt him. You know, he's not like I said, he's no protagonist, he's no hero. I think he just, you know, he needed to go through some of those things. And I wanted him to sort of put those flaws on full display, and I think that for him to move forward from that was only possible once he overcame his grief and his sorrow, and ended up shifting and moving to Karachi, and you know, seeing for himself what life could be like on the other side of that. And it was only then that his character started to somewhat improve, in a positive manner.
Right. And in the book, both Yara and Temur end up becoming immigrants. And you were speaking earlier too about the diaspora in the US. So did you write this novel for the diaspora?
Um, no, I mean, I think while they may find value in it, I honestly wrote it for people who would be based here in the U.S. and would have a connection to both of those places. Um, I don't know if the diaspora will cling on to this book as tightly as those people in the United States would, because they may not agree with, you know, my perspectives on those places, Karachi, which I've been to at least 11 times, and stayed each time for about only 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and then Steel Town, which I've only been to once. They may not find it as captivating as you know, people here in the United States who were born and raised here, but whose parents are from there. I think that's more so my target audience.
Right. And for people who aren't Pakistani or who aren't familiar with the places described in the novel, what do you hope that they take away from this book?
Well, that there are more diverse stories out there, that they can learn from, um, that that there's more to literature than obviously non-diverse stories, and that the plight that women face is not just in you know their hometown or wherever they're from, but it's also more prevalent in places like in Pakistan, and they should also take away the fact that if they do come across someone from those places, they shouldn't go out of their way to make them feel um, any sort of tension or discomfort when it comes to trying to include them. But they should just keep in mind that you know they are at a disadvantage, despite how pardalike they are, or despite how well studied they are or well learned. Um, they may still be at a disadvantage. So um, you know, treat everyone with kindness and respect, because you never know who's at battle or at war. Yeah, I think that's what I would want people to take away from it, and also knowing that you're going back to the title, that that your home can also be your body, despite how unseen you feel. Um, that is one of your resting places, that you should that you should definitely tend to, no matter where you are, or where you're from, or where you actually live.
For sure. Can you talk more about why home is an important concept in the novel?
Yeah. Well, their homes in actuality can't be any more different. When I say there, I mean Timur and Yara. So if you were to take 500 of maybe Timur's homes, that would maybe you would still maybe have some, and put them in Yara's home, you would maybe still have some room left over. That's the size difference between their abodes, and what stuck out to me was just that migration that they take from Pakistan to Georgia, to the United States. Um, that concept of finding a new home. What happens in a home to Yara sort of ends up defining a lot of her and sticking with her as she grows older. And this title alludes to the fact that alludes to the fact that um, you know we, of course, in the book, refers to both Tamor and Yara as one. Um, are as in right now. Um, Also meaning like in addition to, and then home meaning wherever they are, wherever the two of them go, one of them feels like home to the other. So there's that, and then there's also the 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 um the body aspect of that. Um, and I think that their actual homes. I mean, Timur ends up leaving his home in the book. Um, I don't think he goes back. He doesn't go back. So he has to redefine that for himself. And everywhere people live in this book, there's something there or some event there that has an effect on the plot, and I think that that's what's important as well.
Definitely. Is there anything else you want to add, or
Yeah,
anything else to talk about?
yeah, I'd love to let's see. Um, well, in the acknowledgments, I talked about obviously my family. I talked about a few of the artists, musicians who inspired some of this book. Um, and there was also some in loving memory of some artists that have since passed. Um, and I think that while I'll be promoting this book for some time, I think that my next book, because this was such a niche passion project, I think if I am to write another book, I may focus on a story that is not so that maybe is not so diverse. That maybe try my hand at writing white characters, or something that is a little more science fiction esque, a little more YA fantasy, um, and foregoing race and gender and class by itself. Not that because I don't have a moral obligation to those things, but because I feel like this book has done a lot for those causes, and but you never know. So yeah, we are also home out now, um, on Amazon, and inside looks good. So thank you so much, Iman.
Thank you, Mustafa, for writing your book. So you're saying that people can get it from Amazon and where else?
So right now it's only available on Amazon. If you would like, you can reach me directly, and I can place a copy in the mail for you as well.
Okay, great. It was great talking to you, and it was even more amazing reading your new book.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you.